The history of the tank begins with World War I, when armored all-terrain fighting vehicles were introduced as a response to the problems of trench warfare, ushering in a new era of mechanized warfare. Though initially crude and unreliable, tanks eventually became a mainstay of ground armies. By World War II, tank design had advanced significantly, and tanks were used in quantity in all land theaters of the war. The Cold War saw the rise of modern tank doctrine, and the rise of the general-purpose main battle tank. The tank still provides the backbone to land combat operations in the 21st century. Development. World War I generated new demands for armored self-propelled weapons, which could navigate any kind of terrain, and this led to the development of the tank. The great weakness of the tank's predecessor, the armored car, was that it required smooth terrain to move upon, and new developments were needed for cross-country capability. The tank was originally designed as a special weapon to solve an unusual tactical situation: the stalemate of the trenches on the Western Front. It was a weapon designed for one simple task: crossing the killing zone between trench lines and breaking into enemy defenses. The armored tank was intended to be able to protect against bullets and shell splinters, and pass through barbed wire in a way infantry units could not hope to, thus allowing the stalemate to be broken. Few recognized during World War I that the means for returning mobility and shock action to combat was already present in a device destined to revolutionize warfare on the ground and in the air. This was the internal combustion engine, which had made possible the development of the tank and eventually would lead to the mechanized forces that were to assume the old roles of horse cavalry and to loosen the grip of the machine gun on the battlefield. With increased firepower and protection, these mechanized forces would, only some 20 years later, become the armor of World War II. When self-propelled artillery, the armored personnel carrier, the wheeled cargo vehicle, and supporting aviation, all with adequate communications, were combined to constitute the modern armored division, commanders regained the capability of maneuver. Numerous concepts of armored all-terrain vehicles had been imagined for a long time. With the advent of trench warfare in World War I, the Allied French and British developments of the tank were largely parallel and coincided in time. Early concepts. Leonardo da Vinci is often credited with the invention of a war machine that resembled a tank. In the 15th century, a Hussite called Jan Žižka won several battles using armored wagons containing cannon that could be fired through holes in their sides. But his invention was not used after his lifetime until the 20th century. In 1903, a French artillery captain named Léon Levavasseur proposed the Levavasseur project, a cannon autopropulsor, self-propelled cannon, moved by a caterpillar system and fully armored for protection, powered by an 80-horsepower petrol engine. The Levavasseur machine would have had a crew of 3, storage for ammunition, and a cross-country ability, but the viability of the project was disputed by the Artillery Technical Committee until it was formally abandoned in 1908 when it was known that a Caterpillar tractor had been developed, the Hornsby of engineer David Roberts. H. G. Wells, in his short story The Land Ironclads, published in the Strand magazine in December 1903, had described the use of large, armored cross-country vehicles equipped with pedrel wheels, an invention which he acknowledged as the source for his inspiration to break through a system of fortified trenches, disrupting the defense and clearing the way for an infantry advance. They were essentially long, narrow, and very strong steel frameworks carrying the engines, and borne upon 8 pairs of big pedrel wheels, each about 10 feet in diameter, each a driving wheel, and set upon long axles free to swivel round a common axis. This arrangement gave them the maximum of adaptability to the contours of the ground. They crawled level along the ground with 1 foot high upon a hillock and another deep in a depression, and they could hold themselves erect and steady sideways upon even a steep hillside. In the years before the Great War, two practical tank-like designs were proposed but not developed. In 1911, the Austrian engineering officer Gunther Bursten submitted a proposal for a fighting vehicle that had a gun in a rotating turret, known as the Motorgeschichte in 1912. The Australian civil engineer Lancelot de Mole's proposal included a scale model of a functional fully tracked vehicle. Both of these were rejected by their respective governmental administrations. American tracked tractors in Europe. Benjamin Holt of the Holt Manufacturing Company of Stockton, California, was the first to file a U.S. patent for a workable crawler-type tractor in 1907. The center of such innovation was in England, and in 1903 he traveled to England to learn more about ongoing development, though all those he saw failed their field tests. Holt paid Alvin Orlando Lombard $60,000, equivalent to $1,809,556 in 2021, for the right to produce vehicles under Lombard's patent for the Lombard steam log hauler. Holt returned to Stockton and, utilizing his knowledge and his company's metallurgical capabilities, he became the first to design and manufacture practical continuous tracks for use in tractors. In England, David Roberts of Hornsby and Sons, Grantham, obtained a patent for a design in July 1904. In the United States, Holt replaced the wheels on a 40 horsepower, 30 kilowatts Holt steamer, number 77, with a set of wooden tracks bolted to chains. On November 24, 1904, he successfully tested the updated machine plowing the soggy delta land of Roberts Island. When World War I broke out, with the problem of trench warfare and the difficulty of transporting supplies to the front, the pulling power of crawling-type tractors drew the attention of the military. Holt tractors were used to replace horses to haul artillery and other supplies. The Royal Army Service Corps also used them to haul long trains of freight wagons over the unimproved dirt tracks behind the front. Holt tractors were, ultimately, the inspiration for the development of the British and French tanks. By 1916, about 1,000 of Holt's Caterpillar tractors were used by the British in World War I. Speaking to the press, and claiming the British tanks in use in 1916 were Holt-built, Holt Vice President Murray M. Baker said that these tractors weighed about 18,000 pounds, 8,200 kilograms, and had 120 horsepower, 89 kilowatts. 20. By the end of the war, 10,000 Holt vehicles had been used in the Allied war effort. French development. The French Colonel Jean-Baptiste Eugène Estienne articulated the vision of a cross-country armored vehicle on August 24, 1914. Victory in this war will belong to the belligerent, who is the first to put a cannon on a vehicle capable of moving on all kinds of terrain. Colonel Jean-Baptiste Eugène Estienne, August 24, 1914. Some privately owned Holt tractors were used by the French army soon after the start of World War I to pull heavy artillery pieces in difficult terrain. 23. But the French did not purchase Holts in large numbers. It was the sight of them in use by the British that later inspired Estienne to have plans drawn up for an armored body on Caterpillar tracks. In the meantime, several attempts were made to design vehicles that could overcome the German barbed wire and trenches. From 1914 to 1915, an early experiment was made with the Boirault machine, with the objective of flattening barbed wire defenses and riding over gaps in a battlefield. The machine was made of huge parallel tracks, formed by 4 by 3 meter metallic frames, rotating around a triangular motorized center. This device proved too fragile and slow, as well as incapable of changing direction easily, and was abandoned. In France, on December 1, 1914, Paul Frut, an engineer constructing canals for the Compagnie Nationale du Nord, proposed to the French ministry a design for a land ship with armor and armament based on the motorization of a compactor with heavy wheels or rollers. The Frotlafly was tested on March 18, 1915, and effectively destroyed barbed wire lines, but was deemed lacking in mobility. The project was abandoned in favor of General Estienne's development using a tractor base, codenamed Tracteur Estienne. In 1915, attempts were also made to develop vehicles with powerful armor and armament, mounted on the cross-country chassis of agricultural tractors, with large wheels having coarse treads, such as the Aubry-Gavet, Fortress, Fortin Aubry-Gavet. The vehicle was powered by electricity, complete with a supply cable, and armed with a Navy cannon of 37 millimeters. But it too proved impractical. In January 1915, the French arms manufacturer Schneider and Company sent out its chief designer, Eugene Brilly, to investigate track tractors from the American Holt Manufacturing Company, at that time participating in a test program in England for a project of mechanical wire-cutting machines. On his return, Brilly, who had earlier been involved in designing armored cars for Spain, convinced the company management to initiate studies on the development of a tractor-blind ET-arm, armored and armed tractor, based on the Baby Holt chassis, 2 of which were ordered. Experiments on the Holt Caterpillar track started in May 1915 at the Schneider plant with a 75 horsepower wheel-directed model and the 45 horsepower integral Caterpillar Baby Holt, showing the superiority of the latter. On June 16, new experiments followed, which were witnessed by the President of the Republic, and on September 10, by Commander Ferris. The first complete chassis with armor was demonstrated at Sauen on December 9, 1915, to the French Army, with the participation of Colonel Estienne. On December 12, unaware of the Schneider experiments, Estienne presented to the High Command a plan to form an armored force, equipped with tracked vehicles. He was put in touch with Schneider, and in a letter dated January 31, 1916, Commander-in-Chief Joffre ordered the production of 400 tanks of the type designed by Brilly and Estienne, although the actual production order of 400 Schneider CA-1 was made a bit later, on 25 February 1916. Soon after, on April 8, 1916, another order for 400 Saint-Chamond tanks was also placed. Schneider had trouble with meeting production schedules, and the tank deliveries were spread over several months from September 8, 1916. The Saint-Chamond tank would start being delivered from April 27, 1917.